My name is Unn Falkeid. I am Professor of History of Ideas at the University of Oslo and the winner of the Giuseppe Alberigo Senior Award 2020. Let me first of all give my warmest thanks to the Fondazione per le Scienze Religiose Giovanni XXIII, the European Academy of Religion, and the Emilia-Romagna region for granting me the prestigious award. It would have been a true pleasure to receive the prize during the Great Gala in Bologna, where I, for a short period, studied when I was young. But unfortunately, the conference and the gala needed to be cancelled because of the COVID-19 epidemic. And I have to thank you in this digital way, instead from my private home in Norway. But let me please express my deepest gratitude. The prize is a reward for a long-lasting work, which I never thought should have such an outreach as it has got. I am also deeply honored to belong to the legacy of Professor Alberigo, as the prize invites me to. As you all know, he was a significant church historian from the Bologna School, together with the distinguished Professor Alberto Meloni. I am invited to present my book, The Avignon Papacy Contested, an intellectual history from Dante to Catherine of Siena, which was published by Harvard University Press in 2017. Let me start with a general survey of the Avignon Papacy, which constitutes the background or the historical framework of my research, before I return to the more specific investigations I have done. The papacy's residence in Avignon in the 14th century represents the zenith of papal power in Europe. Over the approximately 7 decades during which the Pope and his curia sojourned in the southern France, the Church was subjected to an ambitious process of centralization. The institutional bureaucracy swelled out, and the Avignonese popes could increasingly exercise the power more straightforwardly than ever before. It was a stable period for the curia, in contrast to its itinerant character in the previous century, and the city of Avignon itself had several advantages, such as a more peaceful population and a better climate than Rome, in addition to its central location on the trading routes between southern and northern Europe. What happened, though, in the 7 decades in Avignon was that the papacy developed into an absolute monarchy, with its head, the Pope, claimed fullness of power in religious as well as in secular matters, as first articulated in Pope Boniface VIII's bull Unam Sanctam from 1302. The papal court, keen as it was to exhibit its wealth and prestige, soon came to surpass all other courts in Europe. It was in many ways undoubtedly a glorious period for the city, which was soon turned into an economic, political and cultural center, a truly cosmopolitan place which gathered notaries, lawyers, physicians, architects, artists, traders and merchants from all over Europe. As such, the Avignon papacy set the standard for the future Renaissance popes. Notably, the ecclesiastical changes that took place in the Avignonese period coincide with similar ambitions among European kingdoms and secular rulers. Emperors, kings, barons, and princes strove for supremacy in national or local affairs, and politically they moved towards the same absolutism as the Church did. The papacy thus had to struggle with national monarchies, with the Holy Roman Empire, and above all with the communes, the signorie, and the papal states in Italy. The papacy had to fight with other groups as well, such as the mendicant orders, and especially the spiritual Franciscans, who, despite their earlier strong bonds with the papacy, were condemned as heretics after bitter disputes over apostolic poverty. Another group that contested the Avignon papacy was the growing crowds of educated laity in the cities, which often sympathized with their secular rulers. So, what happened and what has been the main focus in my book is that something that may be labeled as a literary war broke out. The war engaged a series of critics and intellectuals from different traditions and cultures, and for every corner of Europe. Indeed, the fights were far more hostile and long-lasting than any earlier conflicts between secular rulers and the papacy in the Middle Ages. And at the heart of the debate was the question of the legitimacy of the Avignonese Pope. The aim of my book, thus, has been to investigate some of the most prominent critics of the Avignon papacy, whose texts came to have a compelling actuality. I chose the critics on the basis of the strength and originality of their arguments, on their authorial voices in the contemporary debates, and on the general impact of the literary work on later generations. Two of these great thinkers were branded heretics, Marsilius of Padua and William of Ockham. Two were later canonized, Birgitta of Sweden and Catherine of Siena, and two became leading models for future generations of humanists, Dante Alighieri and Petrarch. What they all had in common was an intense critique of the waxing secular power of the Avignon papacy, while appealing for a profound reformation of the Church, the Ecclesia Romana. Despite their different backgrounds, they all stand out as crucial in the debates of the 14th century. More importantly, their works offered inventive solutions to the contemporary crisis, which makes them all significant contributors to the political and intellectual history of the 14th century. The most prevalent studies of late medieval political thought completely exclude figures such as Francis Petrarch, Birgitta of Sweden and Catherine of Siena, despite their indisputable contributions to the contemporary intellectual polemics. The reason is probably that they fall outside our modern and somewhat narrow-minded definitions of what a political thinker or philosopher is. However, the danger with such restricted conceptions is that as readers we anachronistically lose sight of details that may give us more balanced and reliable pictures of the past, indeed even alter our understanding of a whole period. Especially the two women, Birgitta and Catherine, have fallen prey to such limited considerations, with the result that they more or less are wiped out of the historical political scenery. But as readers of my book hopefully will discover, these and similar conclusions are deeply wrong. Both Birgitta and Catherine played decisive roles and were among major voices in the political debates of the 14th century. Indeed, all the six thinkers did not only come to have a decisive influence on the political events of the time, as well as being significant political agents, their literary works dominated the agenda of contemporary political and intellectual debates with far-reaching effects for the political discourses of early modern Europe. Each of the protagonists has for sure been the subject of long traditions of scholarly investigations. The principal contribution of my book has been to provide an exploration of Dante, Ockham, Marsilius of Padua, Petrarch, Birgitta of Sweden and Catherine of Siena, together in light of the specific setting which they shared, which so intensely preoccupied their minds, and which became the point of departure for their political and literary commitments. Chapter 1 offers a new reading of Paradiso 6 from Dante's Commedia. In this canto, one of the most politically charged in Dante's fictional journey through the three realms of the afterlife, Dante the Pilgrim meets Justinian, the 6th century emperor who created the body of Roman or civil law, the Corpus Juris Civilis. Justinian's long monologue strongly defends the Roman Empire and is not so very different from the justifications we find in Dante's political treatise, Monarchia, on the monarchy. The two texts, Paradiso 6 and Monarchia, were written at the same time, probably in 1317 or 1318, as a response to Pope John XXII's attack on the validity of the posts of imperial vicars that had been awarded by Emperor Henry VII to several northern Italian signori, including Dante's patron, Can Grande della Scala. Dante was deeply disappointed by Henry VII's failed attempt to regain imperial control over Italy, and his defeat and death in 1313 only consolidated the power of Pope Clement V in Avignon and paved the way for his notorious successor, Pope John XXII. Thus, in the Monarchia, Dante invokes a monarch capable of bringing peace not only to a war-torn Italy, but also to a Europe ravaged by war and discord. The main reason for the problems was the temporal power of the Pope due to Constantine the Great's presumed donation of the Western Empire to Pope Sylvester early in the 4th century. For Dante, the donation of Constantine was profoundly wrong. His solution was to strictly divide jurisdiction between secular and ecclesiastical authority, with no interference between the two realms. Indeed, a complete transfer of secular power to the emperor was a precondition for establishing peace. Jurisdiction over terrestrial matters belonged to the emperor alone, according to Dante, whereas spiritual matters, in terms of humans' eternal happiness, were under the jurisdiction of the Pope. Chapter 2 consists of a comparative analysis of Dante's Inferno 6 and Monarchia, and Marsilius of Padua's treatise Defensor Pacis, the Defender of Peace. When Ludwig of Bavaria, Henry VII's successor, went to Rome in 1328 to be crowned, Marsilius accompanied the emperor as his personal physician and as one of his main advisors. A few years later, Marsilius had published his extensive treatise Defensor Pacis in 1324, in which he strongly criticized the Avignon papacy. The emperor and his advisor later applied their ideology of the treatise to the undertaking in Rome. Of importance is that the emperor's supporters also refer to Dante's Monarchia, leading Pope John XXII to deem both Dante's and Marsilius' works to be heretical. Despite the shared fate of these two books and both authors' attacks on the Avignon papacy, Dante and Marsilius differed greatly in their interpretation of legitimate authority, whereas Dante emphasized the divine origin of both secular and ecclesiastical power, Marsilius founded the idea of legitimacy on the sovereignty of the Pope, of the people. To Marsilius, the body of citizens represented the will of the whole, and the government rested on the ultimate authority of them. Whereas chapter 1 and 2 focus on two figures whose initial political training and intellectual education took place within the walls of the Italian city-states, in chapter 3 I turn to William of Ockham, who was a Franciscan friar from Oxford. After carving out a career as a philosopher who made important contributions to logic, he became involved in the controversies of apostolic poverty in Avignon. He was imprisoned by the Pope, but managed to escape and joined Ludwig of Bavaria and his court, which included Marsilius of Padua, on the way back to Germany. He spent the rest of his life there in a Franciscan monastery, where he wrote a series of political tractates, including Breviloquium di Principato Tyrannico, a short discourse of tyrannical government, the main text of chapter 3 of my book. In contrast to many of Ockham's other political works, the Breviloquium, which was written in 1342, is a deeply personal text, and its main focus is on the fundamental liberty granted to all human beings by both divine and natural rights. Ockham's argument, which is a wide-ranging attack on the doctrine of papal absolutism, is derived from the disputes about apostolic poverty that 15 years earlier had condemned the celebrated theologian and scholar as a heretic. Although Pope John XXII rejected the division between ownership, dominion, and the use, usus, of things, the division constituted the heart of the Franciscan spirituality, the friars' voluntary rejection of any dominion in order to live under what Ockham described as prelapsarian freedom. Ockham argued that the Franciscans had renounced all worldly rights, including the right to sue in court and to own property. Nonetheless, there was a right that was universal to all men, and that consisted of the right to use external things. This was a natural right and liberty conferred by God and nature, since it was necessary to maintain life. Chapter 4 turned to Petrarch, the father of humanism, or l'initiateur de la Renaissance, as Pierre de Nolhac once so famously called him, because of his efforts to transform the cultural agenda through a revival of antiquity. The portrayal of Petrarch as such a seminal humanist figure has been modified today by a stronger focus on the contextual realities of his works, as well as a more nuanced studies of the early humanist movement. Nevertheless, there has been, and still is, a tendency to undervalue the impact of the city of Avignon, which in many respects shaped Petrarch's role as the most celebrated intellectual of his time. Petrarch's works are full of ambiguities, not all of which are easy to grasp. The exiled author, or the peregrinus ubique, the pilgrim everywhere, as he liked to describe himself, constantly challenged his many interlocutors, while he swiftly shifted positions and loyalties. In chapter 4, I examine a letter to Cola di Rienzo, Lettere disperse 8, in which Petrarch stepped decisively into contemporary politics. His fervent defense of Cola's revolution in Rome in 1347 and the subsequent establishment of the Roman Republic were followed by the author's increasingly harsh condemnation of the Avignon papacy, in which he applied a biblical and apocalyptic rhetoric common among the spirituals. Classical ideas, the restoration of Rome, and eschatological desires, the dawn of a new age, merged, according to Petrarch, in the figure of Cola. In 1350, the year of Rome's great jubilee, of which Petrarch had been one of the main promoters, and 4 years before the melodramatic execution of Cola at the Capitol Hill, Birgitta of Sweden entered Rome. Except for her frequent trips around Italy, her journey to Cyprus and even to Jerusalem, Rome became her residence for the last 23 years of her life. And from here, she started a campaign to return the papacy from Avignon. No one fought with more fervor and constancy for the sake of Rome than Birgitta. Unfazed by their high station, she wrote letters compiled in her vast collection of revelations to Pope Clement VI, Innocent VI, Urban V, and Gregory XI, in which she described in a most apocalyptic manner the wretched state of the city, claiming that its princes were like feral robbers, its building dilapidated, its churches abandoned, and its canons, priests, and deacons openly kept mistresses in their homes. According to Birgitta, It was high time to restore Rome as well as the Catholic faith, and only the return of the Pope could dispel the evils present in the city. Chapter 5 consists of an analysis of the way in which Birgitta came to model her activities on the figure of the widow who was speaking for the sake of Rome. In a letter obliquely addressed to Pope Clement VI, she presents herself as a widow, which she was in real life after her husband, with whom she had 8 children, had passed away. The actual letter is written just after her arrival in Rome, and the text describes a vision she presumably received in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore on the top of the Esquiline Hill. However, the miserable state of the church, as Birgitta depicts it, soon turns into a profound critique of the current state of the Ecclesia Romana. As such, the topos of the widow has profound political connotations. It reflects the personification of the widowed Rome already adopted by Dante and Petrarch, and later used by Cola di Rienzo in his powerful ideological propaganda during the revolution in Rome in 1347. Catherine of Siena is often depicted as an overwrought woman whose thinking was befuddled with a strained individual mysticism. However, in the last chapter of my book, chapter 6, I discuss how her writings and her personal engagement seem in fact to have a compelling actuality. As the first female author in Italian, she entered the political historical stage with a surprising vibrancy and strength. Her insistence of using the volgare, the vernacular, in her book Dialogo della Divina Provvidenza not only challenged the Latin discourses of contemporary humanists and ecclesiastical authority, it also strengthened her critique of the Avignon Papacy and the theological disagreements that had torn the church apart. The important discussions in her book about the mystical body of the church subtly reject the theocratic ideas of Unam Sanctam, Pope Boniface VIII's bull from 1302, which in many ways initiated the 14th century conflicts and brought the Pope and his curia to Avignon. Recalling Thomas Aquinas' interpretation of the concept of corpus mysticum from the period before the papacy settled in France, Catherine's response to the problem of the Avignon papacy was most diplomatic. She defended the historical and the institutional role of the church while calling for profound reform and thus contributing in her own way to a conflict that had preoccupied humanists, lawyers, and theologians for almost a century. To summarize, through this series of case studies, my book, The Avignon Papacy Contested, offers an in-depth analysis of some of the most authoritative voices of the 14th century who responded, each in their own individual and original manner, to the Avignon Papacy. Dante, Marsilius, Ockham, Petrarch, Birgitta, and Catherine were all concerned with the Pope's claims to absolute jurisdiction and the Papacy's swift increase in prosperity and secular power. Although addressing these problems with different arguments, images, and motivations, I have tried to both demonstrate and discuss how their works in many ways were surprisingly and intriguingly linked to each other by internal references and textual transmissions, by common networks of friends and acquaintances, or by the historical realities in which they were written. Of greatest importance is that Dante's Paradiso 6 and his Monarchia, Marsilius' Defensa Pacis, Ockham's Breviloquium, Petrarch's Letter to Cola di Rienzo, Birgitta's Revelations, and Catherine's Dialogo both reflect and set the agenda for the political debates of the 14th century. Concurrently, the production of each text follows the development of the papacy from its settlement in Avignon to its return to Rome. When considered together, They open a window onto a highly dramatic century in European intellectual history. Thank you very much, and once again, thank you for the Alberigo Award 2020.